The Good Old Grateful Deadcast, the official podcast of the Grateful Dead. I'm Rich Mahan with Jesse Jarnow, exploring the music and legacy of the Grateful Dead for the committed and the curious. Ladies and gentlemen, fellow Deadheads, welcome to Season 11 of the Good Old Grateful Deadcast. I'm your co-host, Rich Mahan. Thank you so very much for tuning in. In this episode of the Good Old Grateful Deadcast, we continue to enjoy the ride as we dive even deeper into the upcoming Grateful Dead box set, Enjoying the Ride. This episode, we continue our look at the shows and enjoying the ride from the East Coast. We want to extend a hearty thank you to everybody who pre-ordered Enjoying the Ride. It is now officially sold out, but you can still grab great music from the set by digging into The Music Never Stopped, which distills Enjoying the Ride into a shorter route through the band's Diamond Anniversary celebration. Featuring at least one song from every venue in the deluxe set, it offers a briefer but no less illuminating journey through the music that shaped the Grateful Dead's live legacy. It will be available on May 30th from Rhino.com on 3 CDs, 6 LPs, and digitally. Also recently announced is a brand new Grateful Dead Greatest Hits, a perfect entry point for the budding Deadhead in your life, and a great single disc addition to your collection. Grateful Dead Greatest Hits will be available as a single CD or LP and comes out June 13th. Make sure to visit dead.net for more info on both of these not-to-be-missed releases. Head on over to dead.net/deadcast and check out all of our past episodes, including the complete seasons 1 through 10 and everything up till now for season 11. And you can link from there to your favorite podcasting platform so you can listen how, where, and when you like to listen. Please help the Good Old Grateful Deadcast by subscribing, sharing us with your friends on social media, hitting that like button, calling your mother, and if the spirit moves you, leave us a review. Thank you very much. Do you have a great tour story you'd like to share? Bet you do. Do it over at stories.dead.net. Record yourself telling about that epic road trip or the best show you ever saw. You just may hear yourself on a future episode of the Deadcast. But remember, we can only use your story if you record it. Thank you. We have transcripts from many of your favorite Deadcast episodes available for your reading pleasure at dead.net/deadcast-index. Check them out. Well, East Coast shows and West Coast shows each had their own vibe for sure. Both great, yet different in their own unique ways. In this episode, part 2 of our look at the great East Coast venues included on the new box set, Enjoying the Ride, we pull back the curtain on some truly epic shows that have gone down in Grateful Dead history as some of the best the band played. Can you dig it? Jesse Jarnow and I knew you could.
Well, this job I got is a little too high.
Without fail, every spring from 1976 through 1995, the Grateful Dead manifested on the East Coast of the United States, usually moving between New York and Virginia, like this 1981 Hampton show we're listening to right now. Sometimes they ventured a bit further north, south, or west, but it's not a coincidence that all 4 shows we're talking about today come from between March and May. Together, they make a representative slice of the band's touring strategy. Play the East Coast in the spring.
Going down the line, going down the line, going down the line, going down the line.
Grateful Dead archivist and legacy manager David Lemieux.
My New York friends, they could go see the Dead within 2 hours at the Garden or Nassau or Hartford or down to the Spectrum or a little bit further to Boston up or Cap Center down, Giant Stadium, Brendan Byrne. There were a lot of places to play.
That was true right from the band's earliest East Coast trips. Gary Lambert.
I saw them play 35 shows in 1970 and only had to go more than a 90-minute radius outside New York once, I think, or twice.
Last episode, we discussed how the Dead made beachheads in New York and Boston, starting with their earliest trips out of the Bay Area in 1967. But it's harder to pinpoint a run of shows that might easily be called their first East Coast tour. Because very often, the Dead operated like those New York fans. They made camp in Manhattan, often at the Navarro Hotel near Central Park, and ventured on trips elsewhere. May of 1970, looping through upstate and central New York to Connecticut, Boston, Worcester, Manhattan, Philadelphia, and Atlanta is the first thing that looks recognizably like a spring East Coast tour.
Going down the line, 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 yeah. Beat it on down the line.
That was the Dead at Harper College, early on that run. Now Dick's Picks 8. We talked a lot about the Dead's early East Coast touring strategy with our late correspondent Sam Cutler during the third season of the Deadcast about Skull and Roses. Here he is reading from his 1971 press release.
We're going to Pennsylvania piddling. First this side of the state in a gymnasium at some anonymous college. It's this place run by the Hamish, and then into Pittsburgh where we played to 2,000 heads in the middle of a bus strike and a snowstorm that leaves 12,000 empty seats and everyone pissed off. Back to the bus. You're on the bus or you're off the bus. Where is the damn bus?
Throughout the 70s, Sam Cutler and other strategists worked out the Dead's East Coast plans. But it was hardly an exact science in 1971.
We change plans while we're making them and fly to Bangor, Maine, where we've never been. And there's going to be some freaks up there. And then, inexplicably, to Durham, North Carolina. The truck driver, Slow Joe, cruising through 2,000 miles in 48 hours with 2 gigs, 3 girlfriends, and no sleep.
We've linked to the rest of that episode at dead.net/deadcast. Sam Cutler's work pointed them towards the 1973 Watkins Glen Summer Jam, the massive show in front of an estimated 500,000 fans with the Allman Brothers and the band that minted a new generation of Northeastern Dead freaks, which we talked about extensively a few seasons back. And then, in 1977, they played for another 300,000.
Ladies and gentlemen, the finest band in the land, the Grateful Dead!
The 1977 show at Raceway Park in Englishtown, New Jersey, was another major marker for the Dead's Northeastern fan base, and perhaps the moment they consolidated their critical mass. On today's episode, we move mostly away from the densely populated urban centers of the Northeast, and as such, with only 4 shows to cover, have a little more room to spread out. Winslow Colwell left us this story that flows nicely into our first show today.
In the late winter of 1978, I stayed for several days as part of a line/party/deadhead gathering, all waiting for the ticket office to open to get our tickets for the May 5th, 1978 show at Dartmouth College. We had a great time all together, hanging out, throwing frisbees, listening to music as we waited for the box office to open. We were there for days. Now, it was chilly, because this is New Hampshire, and I had a sweater that I loved. Had a great pattern on it. It was super warm. But I left it once when I was doing something. I left it there on the ground, and when I came back, it was gone. Well, easy come, easy go.
The band's shows in Vermont and New Hampshire in May 1978 were their first visit to either state.
But then, months later, great show at Dartmouth, and the next night they were playing in Burlington at UVM, and I had no car at the time, so I hitchhiked. VW bus picked me up on Route 89. It was taking me to Burlington. They picked up a friend along the way, and the friend lived way back on a dirt road. Got to the friend's house. He started walking down towards the bus, and what was he wearing? He was wearing my sweater. I said, "Dude, that's my sweater." And he took it right off, gave it to me. No problem, smiles all around.
Winslow got his sweater back exactly a week before the first show we're going to focus on today. 7 days later, and 6.5 or so hours to the south in Philadelphia. By the time the band returned from their 1975 road hiatus, the period for all 4 shows we're talking about today, they understood touring much better. And they certainly understood the Spectrum in Philadelphia, which they played regularly starting in 1972, including the September 21st show, now on Dick's Picks 36.
Jack Stone from Wichita cut his buddy down. Dug for him a shallow grave and laid his body down. Half a mile from Tucson by the morning light. One thing gone and another to go. My old buddy, you're moving much too slow.
The Dead actually played the Spectrum on their second ever trip to Philadelphia in 1968, but it wasn't what you might think. Super listener Brian Schiff left us this story.
The first concert I ever attended was on December 6, 1968 at the Philadelphia Spectrum. It was called the Second Quaker City Rock Festival, and it featured Creedence Clearwater Revival, The Grateful Dead, The Iron Butterfly, Sly and the Family Stone, and Steppenwolf.
Born to be wild.
The early concerts at the Spectrum had a revolving stage, but the Grateful Dead came on second, and they refused to revolve, not surprisingly. Fortunately, I was sitting right in front of them, and I remember at first being completely enthralled by Jerry Garcia's wide-striped pants. It was the real hippies had invaded the East Coast from San Francisco. Being that I was sitting right in front of them, the music was fabulous. I remember roadies also shooting off some flamethrowers from behind the stage, which we weren't sure why, but it added something special to that show. What I always remembered from that was the song Alligator. Pigpen was phenomenal. The rest of the show was also great, except for Steppenwolf, who was horrible.
Born to be wild.
But it took a fair bit of relentless gigging to actually headline the place. Sam Cutler.
We filled the Spectrum in Philadelphia. That was 17,000 people. How did that happen? That happened because 3 times I did tours of fucking colleges in Pennsylvania. Throughout Pennsylvania, right? The band on buses going from college to college and playing in field houses. But, you know, playing for 5 and 6 hours, man. Students just stoned off their faces and couldn't believe it.
When the Dead started playing the Spectrum regularly, the revolving stage was long gone. By the time of their killer shows there in 1972 and 73, they'd worked out their road routine, between the evolving Alembic sound system and their growing road crew. But just like the band, promoters in the early 70s were still learning to put on rock concerts, and sometimes a few steps behind the Dead. The band's involved manual for how to put on a Dead show included a rider that requested protein-rich steaks for the road crew. Perhaps one legacy of Owsley Stanley's influence is that the band's crew did not like carbs in their diet.
There was a famous event, the Great Spaghetti Disaster. There was the promoter, who should be nameless, was dressed in white shoes and a white suit, no less. And we all sat down on these long kind of trestle tables to spaghetti bolognese. And Sparky, bless him, Mark Racine, one of our great equipment guys, not to be fucked with, he walked up to the promoter and said, "Did you order this spaghetti? You know, is this your doing?" And the promoter said, "Yeah. Well, you don't like it?" Whereupon Sparky dumped it right on the top of his head. There was spaghetti all over his white suit. That was another little thing that my diplomatic skills were rapidly called into service.
Correspondence suggests that the incident involved a different crew member, but same difference. Shout out to the late great Sparky Racine. The result was that the Dead parted ways for several years with Electric Factory, their Philadelphia-based promoters, not returning to the Spectrum until the spring of '77. As with Madison Square Garden in New York, there was virtually nowhere else to go.
The Grateful Dead are not dead. Bands poured into their concerts at the Spectrum in Philadelphia from all over the country and can often be found waiting in line all night for tickets to their concerts.
Chris Goodspace was an East Coast head in this era.
Spectrum, other big venues, you can literally feel the energy rippling around the venue. And kind of like the wave almost, but without people standing up and doing their hands. It's all this energy contained, especially outdoor West Coast shows. You don't get that intensity. So an East Coast Dead show is a totally different animal than a West Coast show.
Last season, we spent a good deal of time inside Friend of the Devil's, the recent box that compiled 8 shows from April 1978. It was a few weeks after that set-closing Huntington, West Virginia show that the band rolled into the Philadelphia Spectrum on May 13th, 1978. The Spectrum show is a good example of the kind of show this box was designed to highlight. Grateful Dead archivist David Lemieux.
It was entirely venue-driven, and we have the Spectrum as one of our key venues in Grateful Dead history. One of the shows that came to the top of that list was Spectrum 78. I've listened to it many times over the years, and every time we've done a 1978 release in the last 10 years, it's been given serious consideration, but didn't quite make the cut for whatever reason.
Brian Schiff estimates that he saw every Dead show at the Spectrum, from the Quaker City Rock Festival in 1968 through the band's final shows there in 1995, when they debuted Unbroken Chain.
I was a Flyer season ticket holder for a year, so I've literally was at the Spectrum hundreds and hundreds of times. It had a lower bowl and an upper deck, and originally that's all was there. And then when the Flyers got really popular in the early 70s, they actually added a third deck around the roof. But it was just like the main concourse when you walked in the door off the outside that sort of circled the arena, and that was kind of it. There wasn't any real other little interesting nooks and crannies in there. It was like the outside, you walked in and you were just in the arena in the bowl. My Flyer season tickets were section H, row 14, which was in the hockey arena between the red line and the blue line. So that was like the perfect seat for the Dead also, like just a quarter of the way back from where the stage was and on the side and 14 rows up from the floor. So that was always a great seat as far as I was concerned. And that was where I tried to go.
Scott Jones left us a story about hitting the Spectrum in 78.
I was in the middle of law school finals, first year. I had a criminal law exam on Monday. The show was Saturday night, if I recall. It was a crazy night. We went nuts on the way there, nuts in the lot. I was on my own there at the show after doing about everything you can. I recorded this one myself with my old Sony 158 cassette deck. From the second row, in front of the monitors for Godshow, Keith, by myself with the deck around my neck and both mics being held in one hand.
We talked a lot about Garcia's playing in 1978 during that Friend of the Devil season.
The first set of this show, I think, is one of the best from the May tour running May 6th to May 16th. Great music never stopped, incredible music never stopped. I like that sound from May 78. It's a very distinct sound from April, which is still that kind of tail end of 1977 sound.
Over the course of the April 1978 shows on the Friend of the Devil's box, the band half-accidentally engineered the template they'd employ for the second sets over the rest of their career.
They also fell into more of a formatted second sets in particular. Maybe 4 songs and then Rhythm Devils and maybe a little space and then usually Not Fade Away or Ike or Truckin' or something out of drums or other one. 76 and 77, there was a lot more flexibility in how they were structuring those second sets. April is when they kind of settled in, and May, the band has really settled into that format, and they're having a ton of fun.
For Brian Schiff, the second set at the Spectrum in 78 was faith-affirming.
That first set, it was great music, but there was no real jam songs except for they ended with Music Never Stops. I remember even thinking, like, is my love starting to wane, kind of? But then the second set started, and it was, of my 125, one of the best second sets ever. I used to question how much Jerry Garcia really loved singing, but that night he was singing phenomenally, and he seemed like totally into all of those vocals. So then they started playing Terrapin, was the third song, and it was just absolutely stellar.
Let my inspiration flow in token rhymes, suggesting rhythm I will not forsake till my tale is told and done.
Brian was with his buddy and softball teammate Mitch.
One of my closest friends, who was also one of my closest Deadhead friends, a guy named Mitch Weinberg, when we graduated and we came back to Philly, we wanted to create another softball team. So that was in 77, so we came up with the Terrapins. We thought that was a great name, and I'm pretty sure I designed that shirt, which had the Terrapin like from the album cover, but holding a baseball bat and having a baseball cap on. And then a couple years later, as players were changing on the team and stuff, and we had to get new jerseys, we said, why don't we put strategy as a strength and not disaster? Why don't we put SSND on it and see if anyone knows what the hell we're talking about? And so we did put it on that shirt, and every league we played in, people would ask us what it stood for, and we would never tell them. We refused to let anyone know. So you have to listen to Terrapin Station and see if you can figure it out.
Sailor gave an Easter child, the soldier being much too wise. Strategy was a strength and not disaster.
We've posted a picture of the jersey at dead.net/deadcast.
When Mitch was really screwing up as he was our pitcher on the mound, that was what I would walk up to him and say to him. Strategy is our strength and not disaster. So go throw a goddamn strike already.
Good pep talk, Brian.
From the northwest corner of a brand new crescent moon, crickets and cicadas sing a rare and different tune. Terrapin Station in the shadow of the moon. Terrapin Station.
The Terrapin was off the charts.
David Lemieux.
In 77, 78, Terrapin into playing was the way to go. And I love that. I love the way Terrapin would build, explode, and then it would peter down, and then you'd hear Weir count down the 10 and then right into playing in the band.
Sometimes playing in the band jams thin out as they move into the drum section. Tonight, it gets denser. As we explored in our Friend of the Devils episodes, the original Rhythm Devils concept of spring 1978 was for an expanded crew to take over Mickey Hart's percussion collection. According to the Lansdale Reporter, the Spectrum Gang included all 6 band members and assorted people from the crew. One scene report from a fan suggests that Bill Walton, sidelined from basketball for the season, was among them, which I find eminently believable.
I love the post-drums section. The entire end of the show after Rhythm Devils is just straight rock and roll in your face. I find they're having a ton of fun and blowing the roof off the place, as they tended to do at the Spectrum.
Brian Schiff.
The trucking on that, it was absolutely rocking the pieces. The music was great. What I call the jump backs, they did twice. There's an incredible interchange between Bobby and Jerry, with Jerry, doing lead stuff and Bobby playing slide guitar. And I listened to it recently since I knew we were doing this, and I couldn't. First, I was thinking, is it Jerry playing slide? But then you hear Jerry's playing his stuff too. They played Black Peter one time at the Spectrum completely in the dark, like they just shut all the lights out because it was Black Peter. And I'm pretty sure that was that one, but I can't say.
See how everything lead up to this day, and it's just like any other day that's ever been.
Scott Jones.
Went back to the hotel, which was the old Hilton across from the Spectrum and the baseball stadium. Out of money, dry as could be, law school exam in 36 hours. I'm in the elevator, a guy goes, "Hey, follow me." Long story short, I get in the Dead's party suite. There's a cooler beer. Jerry and Keith are there. I point to the cooler. Jerry nods at me. I chug a beer. Point to the cooler again. Jerry smiles, nods again. Chug another beer. Spent about an hour and a half in there drinking beer, listening to them talk, smoking a little with Bobby, chatted with Mickey. Great, great night.
From the Deadcast traffic copter, Mr. Completely.
In the era before online maps, if you weren't from the Northeast, it was really smart to talk to someone who was and take notes about the actual right way to get anywhere, because there's so many localisms about what you do and don't actually want to do, as opposed to what makes sense looking at the atlas, or maybe what comes in with your tickets from mail order. You know, the little flyers they sent out, which is, just, go up 95 and take this exit and then do this. And then your friends are like, no, if you do that, you're fucked. Go 2 exits further, then come down on this thing and park here. That kind of lore, none of which I remember, but it seemed to exist for every venue.
I remember having to keep track of the split in I-95 around the Philadelphia area, which it sounds like Mr. Completely also reckoned with, or maybe didn't.
It all seemed to matter, because otherwise you'd be stuck in construction on the Parkway or something like that. Or like my dumbass ended up driving through the enormous South Philly ghetto after a show, spun to the gills, trying to find the highway because I took the wrong exit, right? What looked like the right exit, but was labeled weird in some way.
The Northeast Highway exchanges could spit you out anywhere, and like the Dead's tours sometimes did, we're going to zag north before we zig further south. David Lemieux.
And I remember going to the Hartford Civic Center, and I'd seen them there a bunch in 87, 88. And I remember going in 1990 and just getting off the highway exit and going to downtown Hartford. It was raining. It was March 17th. It was St. Patrick's Day 90. Dead were playing the 18th and 19th. It's raining and it's dark and it's nighttime. And these 2 guys jaywalk. And I had to I almost hit them. And it was Brent. And I was like, oh my God, I almost hit Brent. I remember that very well. Downtown Hartford. Stayed in a hotel. Happened to be the same hotel the crew was staying in. So I was like, oh, there's Harry Popick and there's Dan Healy. I couldn't believe it.
David was pulling into town for some excellent shows, but just over 9 years late for the one we're talking about today.
They started playing there in 77 at the Hartford Civic Center. The Dead played this great show in May of 77.
That's the release now known as Two Terrapin.
Another incredible 16,000 seat, the right size East Coast venue that was very welcoming to the Deadheads, and it was a good place for them to play. But then unfortunately, it literally snowed so hard that the roof caved in 78, and so they had to shut the venue down.
Come down, shacking, Bigfoot County, snow so hard that the roof caved in.
And then when they returned there in 80, 81, 82, 83, 84, 86, 87, 88, 90. They played a lot of good shows at the Hartford Civic, consistently good shows too, and some interesting ones for sure. The 81 show in particular, it was a show that has long been on my radar, and it was always up there with 3-9, 81 at the Madison Square Garden.
This seems to be a recurring theme, because dude just never stopped playing. Garcia had been through Hartford a month before, playing the Bushnell Theater with the Jerry Garcia Band in early February 1981, part of 4 weeks of side trips before just 3 nights off and heading back out with the Dead. The Grateful Dead hit Hartford on Pi Day.
You know it's gonna get stranger, so let's get on with the show. Let's go.
We talked a good deal about the Grateful Dead in the spring of '81 during our In and Out of the Garden episode about that year, which we've linked to at dead.net/deadcast. The previous fall, the band had tightened themselves up to record what would become the twin acoustic and electric live albums Reckoning and Dead Set. Hartford was the last night of a 13-show tour that had started in Chicago and worked its way east. And, after Hartford, the band was getting ready to hop over the pond for their first European shows since 1974.
It was a good place. And it was a funny little arena. It was home of the Hartford Whalers at the time, March 14th. The first set in particular, with one of the biggest early 80s versions of Sugaree I've ever heard. I feel that Sugaree hit that kind of peak in May of 77. There's a lot of good Sugarees on that tour. And then it was always really good after that. But I feel that the one on March 14th, 81 at the Hartford Civic Center is up there with those 77 versions. It hits. The Hartford first set matches the second set. This first set is just up there with one of the best. Certainly one of the best from the early 80s and one of the best from the eras. The second set of this show, it doesn't have a big jam. It doesn't have a shakedown or a Scarlet Fire. It's got a lot of really precisely played, really high energy, perfect songs.
I love the way Garcia navigates the Ship of Fools vocals here. Ultra present and always timely. Great other one, too. If you keep track of teases, Garcia quotes from Bach's Jesu Joy of Man's Desiring during the transition into Stella Blue.
I love Hartford Civic Center. I saw a lot of Dead shows there. Saw my first show there.
That's now Dave's Picks 36.
Will I marry me, your wife? She's in trouble all my life. Brought me out in the cold, rain and snow. Rain and snow.
It just felt like a very good place for the Dead to play because it's a good sized city, but it's not too big. It's not Boston. It's not Philly. It's not Madison Square Garden. It's a big enough city for the Dead to kind of be a little bit anonymous in, but it's also small enough that we felt like we were home.
Not every head shared this take. To some, Hartford was Harshford. Mr. Completely.
I never had the Harshford experience that people talk about with the terrible security and cops and stuff like that. But that was just luck. But after 87, it wasn't a special room. It was just another shed.
But sometimes you harsh the Ford, and sometimes the Ford, well, it harshes you.
It's a pretty big city, but it's no match for Deadheads. And again, there's another place that they got asked to not come back.
After the spring 1990 shows, where David almost ran over Brent Midland, and an estimated 5,000 Deadheads camped out in the city park, the Dead didn't return, though the Jerry Garcia Band did. With a few exceptions, by the late 1980s, the Dead could no longer play some of their favorite venues. The Dead certainly had lots of fans in the mid-Atlantic region, but maybe one reason they found some favorite homes there is because the venues allowed enough space to fit both the local heads as well as the rabid Dead freaks of the Northeast that hit whatever shows were an easy-ish striking distance, at least for most of the 80s. In our Friend of the Devil's episodes about the Dead Spring 78 tour, we heard about how the tour picked up more Deadheads as it moved north. I'd argue that the balancing line was probably somewhere just south of Washington, D.C., roughly where the highways get untangled and the roads open up a little bit more. How do you get to Washington, D.C.? Mr. Completely.
And like there was a classic thing like that with RFK Stadium, where if you're going to RFK, there's this like series of exits. And if you take the wrong one that really looks like the right one, you actually end up in Anacostia, which is not where you want to be, as opposed to ending up in the parking lot for RFK Stadium, which is where you do want to be.
But beyond the Beltway, things loosened considerably.
Everywhere in the Northeast had somewhere like that, whereas everywhere in the South, the dangers were just cops. But like getting to the venue, if you missed the venue, like there was no chance of getting on a one-way parkway with no exit for 12 miles. All of a sudden, you're 2 counties over, and you're like, how the hell did I get here?
Once free of the Northeast's gravitational pull, all kinds of different touring strategies came into play.
In the pre-cell phone era, we developed, my friends and I, just a couple of ways of meeting up in places. And it all just grew out of going to shows at Hampton. None of it was planned. It just became the habit that if you're staying at a hotel and there is a Red Roof Inn near the venue, you stay at the Red Roof Inn nearest the venue.
Next time, hit the roof. Red Roof Inns. Call 1-800-THE-ROOF.
This developed over the course of years into literally a herding mechanism and of course it only extends so far at those times. I've actually tried to look up, how far north did Red Roof Inns go in 1990? And because they weren't everywhere, but they were everywhere in the South. And they were pretty far, I think, in the Midwest, and they went some north. But it wasn't like a fully established, it wasn't like Howard Johnson's or something like that, where you could go anywhere and Howard Johnson had his hojo working somewhere.
Howard Johnson got his hojo working. Hojo
Really teed us up for an NRBQ drop, huh, Mr. C?
Like 85% of my hotel room party memories are at a random Red Roof, to the point that sometimes I have a hard time remembering, was this Greensboro, or was it Charlotte, or was it Hampton, or Roanoke, or any of these places that had them. And Waffle Houses, it's a little bit of a joke now. Waffle Houses are more famous for disaster recovery and late night brawls than anything else. But at the time, it was the most reliable food you could find on the road in terms of food that wasn't gross, where you could actually just get a decent hash browns and eggs and bacon and coffee at any time in the middle of the night, anywhere you were. It was always going to be the same.
Just say good morning.
Good morning.
The Waffle House way.
I like it that way.
We've got eggs any way you like them. 24 hours a day. Just come on in.
Come on in.
You'll see.
You'll see.
We're gonna treat you like your family.
David Lemieux had his own post-show dining preferences.
We got to know all of the 24-hour restaurants around the country. Denny's was a big one for us. Denny's, you could always get that club sandwich with the little toothpicks holding it in, cut into quarters with French fries.
But, like Red Roof Inn, Waffle House was a meetup spot for at least some crews.
If you're going to get food the day of the show, like at a restaurant, or late night afterwards, and there's a Waffle House, you go to the Waffle House. But it was always going to be edible, right? And you wouldn't get hassled, and they weren't weird about people being in there late. They weren't weird about people being in there for 2 hours where you're trying to get your face back on so you can drive to the next place, which there was a lot of that. There was a lot of, we'll like try and get as far as the Waffle House, have some food ground out, and then be ready to drive another 3 or 4 hours after that in a little better state of mind relative to driving.
If you're all in a better headspace now, get your local microbus up to 88 miles an hour. We're headed for Hampton 81.
Spring is here, so bring the family to the Spring Carnival. Enjoy the amusements of America Midway with new exciting rides, plus all of your old favorites. Don't forget wristband days, Thursday, May 11th and Sunday, May 14th, when you can ride all the rides as often as you like for one price. The amusements of America Midway, the family fun place.
There were many legendary factors about the Dead's appearances at the Hampton Coliseum in Virginia. But one perhaps underrated bit is that their spring visit sometimes coincided with the Amusements of America Traveling Carnival, set up in one quadrant of the parking lot, as they were for the May Day 1981 show on the new box. The circus was in town, and so is the circus. David Lemieux.
For East Coast venues, everybody would go to the Spectrum and the Gardens because they were easy to get to. And they drew from these huge metropolitan areas. But the Hampton Coliseum, I think, was the first, one of the only real destination East Coast venues. Up there with Red Rocks, up there with the Greek Theater in Berkeley, up there with the Frost, up there with all these places, that it was a really special place to see the Dead because for whatever reason, they delivered when they played there.
Opened in 1969 and originally called the Hampton Roads Coliseum, it's still there, gleaming on the side of I-64 with its distinct giant molded wings, created on site when the venue was built. There were a few factors that made the 14,000 capacity room a comfortable home for the Dead.
It was a smaller venue. It also was a general admission venue. Every venue I ever saw the Dead on the East Coast, the floor was entirely seats. The Hampton Coliseum, the entire venue seats and floor was all general admission. So it had that kind of California vibe. Like I saw the Dead at the Kaiser, saw them at the Oakland Coliseum Arena. And those are big venues that were entirely general admission. Everybody was respectful. Nobody, fought for seats or anything. You sat where there was room, and that was it.
Mr. Completely.
Hampton had a rep as not a bad cop place, so different from Richmond. Like the cops there were not weird. It was a relatively easy place to get in and out of. Like it was a good driving destination. It was like easy hotels, easy, like everything about it was easy. And that's kind of what people liked about it.
For Northeast Deadheads, it made a destination distant enough to generate adventure. Usually, when the Dead performed Chuck Berry's The Promised Land, they were celebrating the song's destination in California. But at the Hampton Coliseum, they were just across the bridge from the song's departure point at the Norfolk bus station.
Left my home in Norfolk, Virginia, California on my mind. Started like Greyhound Road across Raleigh and on across Maryland.
The 81 show is less than 2 months after the Hartford gig we talked about before. But on the Grateful Dead timeline, that included their Europe 81 tour, recording an unheard album with Robert Hunter at Front Street, mixing the live album Dead Set to be released over the summer, appearing on Tom Snyder's Tomorrow Show with Ken Kesey to promote Reckoning, and playing an acoustic benefit for SIVA, Sing Out for Sight, the band's last performance engineered by Owsley Stanley, recently released by the Owsley Stanley Foundation as Sing Out.
All my life I've been waiting, tonight there'll be no hesitating, boy. When you're with me, oh boy. I want the world to see that you were meant for me.
Hampton 81 is hot across the board. Another show in the band's somewhat conservative post-Dead Set mode, before the gradual re-weirding of the middle 80s. There's a scorching Let It Grow in the first set. And great moments of liftoff in the second.
The Dead just seem to love playing there. It just seems appropriate that that's where the bust outs would happen. Box of Rain, 1986.
Along with the first Box of Rain in 13 years, they also debuted Bob Dylan's Visions of Johanna. And while no doubt Hampton was special for its own reasons, there was a semi-practical reason why the venue saw the band debut or dust off songs. They were tour opening shows. Mr. Completely.
When I went in 85 and 86, I put very little effort into getting tickets and just got them. It was fine. It's no problem. Like in 86, I think I went and stood in line for 2 hours or something. 87, it was like go camp overnight at the ticket place if you actually want seats. But that was just the Jerry hype. That wasn't Hampton hype. That was first East Coast shows after Jerry almost died. And then those shows were not exceptional musically, with a couple of exceptions. The infamous Hampton Terrapin from 87, unbelievable, captured on video famously, through the roof. But among the people that I went with, that's when it started accumulating like heady vibe.
And then there was 1989, when the name formerly the Warlocks appeared on the venue marquee. First since the Greek 84 Dark Star we spoke about a few episodes back. But also the first Help on the Way Slipknot since 85, and the first Addicts of My Life since 72. You can find all this on the formerly the Warlock CDs, cementing the venue's legendary reputation, just in time for the Dead to never play there again. But as with a few other spots we're talking about today, the Jerry Garcia Band returned. Their 1991 show is now part of the Pure Jerry series.
Run, run, run for the roses. The quicker it opens, the sooner it closes. Man, oh, friend of mine. All good things and all good time.
And there's a pretty good tour story that goes with that one. Too good not to include. Mr. Completely.
I always stayed at the Red Roof. That was just part of the thing. That was part of our whole deal, like I've discussed. But the Chamberlain Hotel was this famous party scene, and it's this old building that's literally out on the naval base property in Norfolk, and it's out on the water. Like, you have to drive through the naval base to get to it, and which you wouldn't think would be a magnet for heads, except it's one of these hotels that at the time, now it's been fixed up. It was really big and not too expensive and had been really nice with all that velvet psychedelic wallpaper and super psychedelic rugs on the corridors and shit. But it was old enough at that point that the management weren't very strict. So it was a buck wild party out of this place, and heads in every room and just bedlam and bikers parties and people tripping balls walking up and down the hallways and truly psychedelic wallpaper everywhere. There was a pool, the whole thing. And I went out there just for parties a couple times. But the funniest thing that happened there, funniest, unless you got busted, was in 91, a bunch of heads were staying there for Jerry Band shows. And Dan Quayle ended up staying there. And his Secret Service detail raided the whole place. Swept it bottom to top to clear it for Dan Quayle to stay in the executive suite on the top floor. So I know people who flushed thousands of dollars worth of acid and stuff down that, imagine getting busted, and some people got actually busted by Dan fucking Quayle's Secret Service deep detachment because he was staying in the same hotel they did. But it was a hoot until that happened.
By then, the Hampton legend was well printed.
There's no question Warlocks was the pivot point. After, I also never heard it called the Mothership until the 90s, even though I can see why people call it that, that wasn't a thing. I never heard that term.
I mean, somebody probably used it sometime, but Usenet searches back up this assertion. No references to Hampton as the Mothership appear until 1996. In the 90s, Hampton Coliseum became a favored venue for Phish, and its lore accumulated. It's a short drive to our next venue, a little less than 200 miles, and barely a year later for starters. And if the Hampton Coliseum looks like a mothership, our next destination looks like a giant Pringle. It was a giant Pringle directly adjacent to Washington, D.C.'s Beltway. David Lemieux.
The Cap Center was another venue where you get off the highway and then you had to go this long road to get into the Cap Center. And it wasn't too bad. The Cap Center at the time was used 40 nights a year for hockey, 40 for basketball, plenty of concerts. They knew what they were doing. But if you could avoid those things. So we oftentimes would stay at these hotels that were walking distance. They were a long walk, but they beat traffic. So instead of, 40 minutes in traffic, you got a half-hour walk to the place.
The Dead made their first foray to the Cap Center in summer 1974, bringing along the Wall of Sound. It's hard to say the place was ever beloved, but they kept on trucking back in 76, 78, 80, 81, and our first Capitol stop today, September 15th, 1982. Please welcome Creative Director of the Al Hirschfeld Foundation, David Leopold.
If you'd asked my dad today, you raised 5 kids, what was the biggest mistake you made as a parent? I'm pretty confident he would say letting the boys go to Red Rocks in 1982. Because nothing ever happened, but we were never the same.
And please welcome back, from the Arhoolie Foundation, David's twin, John Leopold.
We literally never came back from that trip. We were on a different road after that one.
John is executive producer of the new album, a tribute to the King of Zydeco, Clifton Chenier, featuring the freaking Rolling Stones, which we've linked to at dead.net/deadcast. But in 1982, being teenagers in the middle of Pennsylvania, they had to be resourceful about getting to gigs.
We worked in this pseudo mall in downtown Harrisburg called Strawberry Square. Dave worked at a delicatessen, and I worked at a Tex-Mex restaurant. And we had to figure out how to get to shows.
We were indiscriminate. If you could drive us, you might have been a serial killer, but that was good enough for us.
The previous September, when we went to Buffalo, there was a guy who worked in the bookstore there, and we convinced him to drive us. We didn't really know him that well, but he drove us to Buffalo. And so this time there was a woman, I don't remember where she worked, but she worked at Strawberry Square, and I think she liked the idea of twin boys going to a Grateful Dead show. It seemed, interesting.
But even in Harrisburg, the Leopolds had started connecting to the outside Dead scene. We told some of this story in our In and Out of the Garden episodes, but it bears repeating. Dave.
My dad had a Watts line. You could make unlimited long-distance phone call. You paid one price. And he worked for the Pennsylvania Senate. And we grew up in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Nothing ever happened. So after school, we would go down there and call people. That's how John met Blair Jackson. Read the book, and so let's give him a call. It was another world.
They found another good use for it. John.
In Philadelphia, we were selling posters. We had this 11 by 14 poster. It had like a rose in the middle that the petals spelled out Grateful Dead. And right before showtime, this van came by, swooped in, gave us a summons, and grabbed all of our stuff. Winterland Productions was enforcing the copyright. And it kind of blew us away. And we take the posters, but we bought all this other stuff. We sold these posters just to have money to buy other stuff, right? I mean, that's what we were doing. We were 16 years old. And we came home and we were upset about it. And my father's a lawyer, and he read the summons, and he said, well, you can protest it for 3 days. So Dave calls up the lawyer, whose name was M. Kelly Tillery. He says, hey, you stole our stuff. And the guy says, but you broke our copyright. I can take you to court. And Dave says, my father's a lawyer. I got free legal help. So I'm going after the stuff you stole from me. And that caused the guy to think for a moment. And maybe 6 or 8 weeks later, we get this huge box. I mean, just huge box of stuff, because it had our stuff and lots of other people's stuff too.
Well, Bob Minkin photos. It was a lot of bootleg images, shirts, stickers. We were into it all. I mean, it was all magic to us.
One of those things was this 8x10 photograph of the Dead from Englishtown. But on the back, it had a list of every show that they played the previous year and what they played at every show, laser beam graphics. And we were like, wow, look at all these shows. It's amazing. By that summer, we started collecting set lists, and we were starting to build a network of people to tell us about what happened at shows.
Unlimited calling helps, but so does having Dave Leopold, a gifted graphic artist who began keeping his beautiful tour books in the summer of 1982, mixing drawings, notes, and collage.
There was a lot of time to kill when you're on the road. We started doing it just as a way to capture the information. It's not like we learned it from somebody, but what else are you going to do? You're going to draw pictures, put in stickers, something you found at the show. Found objects are the best.
We've posted an image of Dave's tour book for Landover 82 at dead.net/deadcast.
By Landover, we were already started thinking like, hey, we're going to put our own picture together and create the print, not printers. We started having an idea of what was happening out there in a different way. It was much more organic, right? There was no internet. There wasn't a single source you could find it. You had to have friends who were at the show who could tell you, or a taper who could share a tape.
In a world without Deadbase or the Golden Road, or an incredibly up-to-date tape collection, every show was a surprise. So the Leopold boys kicked at the dust around Strawberry Square until it was time to roll out.
We literally had to wait until she was done with work to go to the show. So we got there right before. We didn't get a lot of hangout time before the show. But we got to the show, and I don't even think she stayed with us. We immediately found our people and enjoyed the show.
The Leopolds had their own strategy for finding their friends at shows. John.
We didn't try to get right up on the rail. We were on the second level, but we wanted an unobstructed view, and we wanted to be in the first row. And then our folks would come around to those spaces, right? Those were less contested. Your community could come together, right? Your friends could come and dance with you and everything else. So the community was really important to us, and a faceless facility like that just helped that happen.
Dave.
We had met people that over the summer in Red Rocks and Oklahoma City. So, our world was expanding. And, just some of the freaks that you would see at every show, all of a sudden we're like, oh, yeah, that guy.
And you might soon realize that you're that guy, too. Not that Dave and John needed much reminding.
Twins walking around. Yeah, we were freak shows. But that was true every day of our life, when we were together. Especially at that stage of our life, we really looked a lot alike.
Dave's tour book helped bring back memories.
As I look at that page, I remember where we were in the arena. We were on Jerry's side, about, I don't know, one-third of the way back. We were over a stairwell, and I don't know if those were our seats. In fact, I'm pretty sure they were not our seats. That was just a place that was great for us because there was nobody in front of us. There was sort of open space, and we had a good sight line of the band, even if we weren't real up close.
For burgeoning setlist archivists, it was a wild ride from the get-go. Pardon our audience tape.
I was looking at that page this morning. It really brought back to me the whole experience of getting there just in time. Early in my Grateful Dead career, I was always concerned about missing something. And so I'd want to get to the show really early. So when we got to the show and they start with playing in the band, because it starts almost as soon as we get there, my first thought is, we've missed a set. We're late in the game. How can we screw this up so bad?
Sadly, you're going to have to inquire with a tape head about the first set. Archivist David Lemieux.
Unfortunately, the board tape was missing the first 15 minutes. Occasionally, a tape is missing a minute, and then we can fix it with something else, either an audience tape from the show or something else, or an internal edit. This was a little too much.
That opening 15 minutes includes a sweet playing in the band into Crazy Fingers, into Little Red Rooster. John Leopold.
There's a lot of jamming in that show. They fall into these pieces in the first set and the second set that for us as newish Deadheads, we'd had this experience where it was close to the 60s experience where they're playing stuff you don't know where they're going. That was very, very exciting for us. We knew that they had broken out Dupree's Diamond Blues, that they had some new songs. We hadn't heard them, but we knew about this. If you just look and you say the 80s, Jerry's not great, and there's all sorts of drug problems and all that stuff. But for us as new Deadheads, it didn't seem like a static band to us in any way, shape, or form. It just felt like a very exciting time to be into the music.
Go musicking for the tape of the first set, and it's not hard to find. Tune in to Enjoying the Ride, and the second set opens with a monster shakedown street. But then it rolls right into another playing jam before landing in Lost Sailor. Things get ultra-conversational en route into Not Fade Away. In Dave's notebook, he writes, "A real hand clapper." The Not Fade Away hand claps had happened a few times in the earlier 70s, but this is one of the first really big instances, leading to the call and response versions from the later part of the decade.
No, our love will not fade away. Not fade away. Not fade away. No, our love will not fade away. Not fade away. Fade away. No, our love will not fade away.
It just struck me as it was just one of those sort of spontaneous things that happened at a Grateful Dead concert that everybody was tuned into. And it seems obvious now, but I'm not sure people had experienced it just like that on the East Coast, 1982. You know, sure, if you were at Winterland in 78, sure, I can tell you the show that people were doing that. But this seemed very spontaneous.
And for the encore, seemingly out of the blue, the debut version of the most popular song the Grateful Dead would ever write.
And, well, of course, we wouldn't leave the venue before the encore, although there were people leaving. And they started, and I just thought it was Bertha. You know, I thought, are we just hearing it weird?
Must be getting early. Clocks are running late. Paint by number morning sky. It's so phony. Roll the curtain, I don't care. Light the candle, curse the glare. Corners breaking everywhere, but it's alright.
In his notebook, Dave gets the title right, Touch of Grey, and notes, the first ever, which everyone thought was Bertha or something.
And then obviously it's a different song. And so we just sort of stood there sort of watching it and listening to it. I wanted to know what was happening. I was young enough that I didn't want to lose myself into dancing to it because I wanted to find out what it was. Like, this is a new thing. The Grateful Dead are doing a new thing. What is this new thing that they're doing? And so we listened to it. And of course, the chorus is something that we remembered afterwards.
I will get by. I will get by. I will get by. I will survive.
Touch of Grey had been a long time coming, played in a solo arrangement for a few years by Robert Hunter, and was the title track for that unfinished Hunter album we've mentioned a few times. But it was still a shocker, and even more so that it would remain unreleased for nearly another half-decade. In addition to a few lines in a different order, this early draft has a rhyme later excised.
I see you got your list out. Say your piece and kiss off. Yes, I get the gist of it, but it's alright. The only thing I meant to say, sorry that you feel that way. Every silver lining's got a touch of gray.
I don't know how we knew it was called Touch of Grey. I think just people started referring to that pretty soon. Because I remember when, for instance, when Hell in a Bucket came out, we first thought it might be called Enjoying the Ride.
The debut of Touch of Grey allows us a brief glimpse of the Deadhead communication network in 1982, before the Usenet really caught on, before the Golden Road. There was the Tor one-sheet Michael, published by Michael Linna.
Michael started, I think, sometime in 1982. That's how we probably found out about the tunes they played in Oregon. You know, the West LA, the Day Job, and the Duprees.
All the new tunes were duly reported in Michael a few weeks later. Maybe someone in the Leopold's vicinity knew the version Hunter had been playing live. By the time Dave made his tourbook page, the name of the new song had reached him via the rounder-than-light Deadhead word-of-mouth network.
We will get by. We will get by. We will get by. We will survive.
In 1982, the 18,000-capacity Cap Center was at the upper boundary of where the Dead could play, a contrast to the slightly cozier 14,000-capacity Hampton Coliseum. But Touch of Grey shot the band into a new orbit, and in the years that followed, the Capitol seemed small by comparison. Starting in the late 1980s, the Dead often played there for 3 or 4 night runs. Strap in, gang. We're jumping to the 90s. Archivist David Lemieux.
They didn't have a lot of places down in Washington, D.C. area. So this was like their Washington, D.C. venue. I always loved it. I saw 11 shows there. It was easy to get in with the traffic. It was like a big parking lot. The Shakedown Street area was that was the first time I ever saw a really defined Shakedown Street. Cap Center had one big area, the main vending area, which we didn't really call Shakedown Street back then, just the busiest part of it. I remember a lot of things about the Cap Center being very positive, and I remember the sound being very good, and I remember just seeing a lot of good shows there.
Chad Eyler left us this story at stories.dead.net.
So we were from York, Pennsylvania, which was just literally right up the road from the Capitol Center, probably about an hour and a half drive. Capitol Center always had a really good scene. Parking there was great. It was everything a Deadhead could want. So, of course, we scored tickets for 3/17, St. Patrick's Day. And that show is one of the only shows that I have a picture of myself at in the parking lot, which I show my children now who are both Deadheads, and they're kind of amazed by that it was so long ago.
This town ain't got no home.
I'm a big fan of Spring 93, really from December 92, when Jerry came back from his 6-month hiatus. Came back with some great shows in December 92, right up through Cal Expo, May of 93. That whole 6 months, I just think, is top-notch Dead. And this show in particular, I've always been a big fan of. A year before Bruce Hornsby left for good, left the Grateful Dead. And I just felt that this was a very good example of the Vince-only iteration of the Grateful Dead. He sounds great. The band sounds great. I feel the band is inspired. You get a few of the newer songs that had debuted in 92 and 93, which is always nice. It's good to get some of that newer material in once in a while.
What a just wonderful show. Of course, you have the newer songs like Eternity and Liberty, but you have those hauntingly beautiful songs like The Days Between and the lovely just Lazy River Road.
Stars fall down in buckets like rain, but there ain't no standing room. Bright blue boxcars, train by train, clouding while dreams unfold. Way down, down along that lazy river road.
To my ears, this is one of the most exciting things about the Grateful Dead from 1993 to 1995. the amount of new songs the band was debuting in preparation for their never-completed final studio album. This Cap Center show has that Lazy River Road we just heard, plus Bob Weir and Willie Dixon's Eternity.
Everything crawl, creep or fly, just live until they die. I love you, honey, you love me. Let's love each other through eternity. Through eternity.
In the second set, the band opens with Liberty. Like Touch of Grey, it was part of Robert Hunter's solo repertoire before making the jump to the Dead.
Ooh, freedom. Ooh, liberty. Oh, leave me alone. Find my own way home. Find my own way home.
The Dead certainly never needed excuses to raise their eyebrows along with the flag, but it was even more topical than usual at these Landover shows. The day before, Mickey Hart and Jerry Garcia had braved the blizzard to spend time hobnobbing with senators at the Library of Congress, celebrating the release of The Spirit Cries, music from the rainforests of South America and the Caribbean, produced by Mickey. The Cap Center 93 show is the Dark Star Night. But another way to describe the second set is a 44-minute playing in the band into Dark Star into the other one. It's the last of 6 times these 3 centerpiece jams appeared in the same show. Chad Eyler.
It was also just a wild ride, too. I mean, the other one, you could hear it on tapes and it was happening within the arena as well. But I think Healy was on the soundboard and he was doing some manipulation of Weir's voice through that song.
Spanish lady come to me, she lays on me the floor. The rainbow spiral running round and tremble and explode. You let the smoke clear of my mind, I'd like to run away. But the heat come round and busted me for smiling on a cloudy day.
There's drums in space, of course, but it's all one big jam, man. And perhaps inspired by all the folklore at the Library of Congress, or maybe just that he'd recently been playing it with David Grisman, Jerry Garcia moves into a jam on the classic Anglo folk song celebrating the legendary queer sailor, the Handsome Cabin Boy. Deep in the second set, punctuating the wild psychedelic ride, Garcia and Hunter still knew The Days Between, debuted a month earlier, only the third version.
There were days, and there were
summer flies and August hurries, and the world grows dark in me.
We refer you to the Silver Snarling Trumpet episodes for more on those in-between days. Like the Landover 82 show, the encore contains the debut of a classic song. Only this time it's not the Dead's classic.
Picture yourself on a boat on a river with tangerine trees and marmalade sky. Somebody calls you, you answer quite slowly. The girl with kaleidoscope.
Little on the bozo nose, perhaps, but in March 1993, the world was a bit upside down anyway. At the show that night was an 80s vintage deadhead named Dennis Alpert. And yes, he was second cousins with Richard Alpert, a.k.a. Ram Dass, but he was no Nepo cousin.
My friend Dan Rosenthal and I, we went to the University of Rochester, and we used to sit around and goof, and whether we were touring or sitting up at campus listening to Dead or whatever, we used to joke that someday we're going to work in the White House, and when we do, we're going to have the Grateful Dead play on the south lawn of the White House. That was our big ha-ha dream. So anyway, so we both go work for the Clinton-Gore campaign.
Dennis's title was Trip Director, working directly with Senator and soon-to-be Vice President Al Gore.
Traveling on that campaign, I was Al Gore's trip director and spent every day of that campaign with either Al Gore or Bill Clinton. I basically ran the road show, and the best way to describe it is I'm kind of the tour manager and stage manager for the vice president. That's pretty much what my job was.
There was a lot of downtime.
I spent a lot of time with President Clinton on that campaign, and we talked about the 60s, we talked about the Grateful Dead, we talked about music, and Bill Clinton was a huge fan of the Dead, loved Jerry. Al Gore and Tipper both, believe it or not, were fans of the Dead. Al used to he talked to me one night on the plane. I can't remember where we were going at the time, but he and I was like the only two people awake late at night, and we were talking about the Dead, and he told me that one of the 8-track tapes that he had in Vietnam was Working Man's Dead. And he said he used to just play it over and over and over and over again because it brought home to him in Vietnam.
Well, the first days are the hardest days, don't you worry anymore. 'Cause when life looks like easy street, there is danger at your door.
He was raised in Tennessee, and Working Man's Dead was Americana / country or Bakersfield sound music, whatever. And to him, he identified with that. Tipper was a fan of the Dead also. She was a total flower child in the 60s and 70s.
Still doesn't get a pass for the PMRC, though.
I ended up going right to the White House January of 1993. One of the first things I did when I got to my office, this was like the first week of February of 1993, is I picked up the phone and I called Grateful Dead Productions in search of Dennis McNally. I'd met Dennis at a show at the Hampton Coliseum maybe a couple of years before, and I'd said, "Hey, Dennis, you and I have met only once before in Virginia at Hampton Coliseum parking lot, and I'm now working in the Clinton administration. I'm a senior staffer for Vice President Gore, and we would like to invite you and the boys to the White House." And he said, "Shut the fuck up." And I said, "Dennis, this is my first official duty in my job. I'm sitting at my desk. I want to let you know it's a new generation of Americans. It's a new era. This is a young president and vice president who grew up in the same generation as the band, and we want to invite you guys to the White House." Next thing I heard, click.
In deference to Thoughts on the Dead, this was an era when phones still did that.
He hung up on me. So I called the White House operator, and I had the White House operator call Grateful Dead Productions, and they got him on the phone. And they said, "Yes, Mr. McNally, this is the White House operator. We have Mr. Alpert on the phone for you." So he said, "Well, can you give me a number to call?" And they did. And so he called me back again. but I did it through the White House switchboard. So he spoke to the switchboard first, and then they connected him to me. And I said, yeah, I'm no shit, Dennis. Long-time deadhead, and here's the deal. When you guys are in town in March, we want to host you at the White House. Or at least we want to invite you and the band and whoever you want to come to the White House, and we'll provide you the VIP tour and whatever else, other surprises we can come up with. We just want you to come and feel welcome in the White House and know that it's a whole new era.
The success of the Grateful Dead in the late 80s and 90s was monumental. Considered as a band, it was amazing. Considered as an American cultural institution, it's dazzling. We've heard this season about the Rex Foundation's support of artists and musicians and weirdos from Ornette Coleman to Harry Smith, and in 1993, they were an arts organization with access to the White House.
They came to Washington, D.C. for 3 shows, I think in March of 1993. And, we took care of all the logistics, and at the curb, waiting to meet them as they pulled the van into the East Visitors Gate, was my oldest brother, Brian, who turned me on to the Grateful Dead, as I told you, and my friend Dan Rosenthal, and me. And out of the van pours Jerry, Mickey, Phil, Jill, Mountain Girl, Dennis McNally, Sue Swanson, maybe, a bunch of the Dead family. Bobby blew it off. He went up to the Hill. He was doing some lobbying and had some meetings on some environmental issues, which was cool. That was no problem. And we literally spent the day with the band at the White House. They all were very familiar with the artwork that was in the White House.
Why me, Abe, of all people? Why me? Because you're such a dip.
Jerry was he touched a lot of the sculptures and statues that were in the White House. Like, he wanted to feel it. And he and Phil would study the paintings very closely. And so, we did this probably 2.5 hour tour of the White House residence, and then we walked through the West Wing to the Oval Office with Jerry, Phil, and Mickey, and a small group, Dennis McNally and the others that I was talking about. Heads were turning every 5 seconds. You could hear as we passed by, was that Jerry Garcia? Oh my God, that was Jerry Garcia. What are the Grateful Dead doing here?
According to Dennis McNally's account, Garcia's attire was sweatpants, and he looked worse than the proverbial unmade bed.
If I was a bed, I would stay unmade.
I brought him down to the vice president's office. I told the vice president that we were hosting them that day, and I told him, of course, that he was hosting them. So he brought them into the office, shot the shit with them for like 30 minutes or so and answered questions, and he showed them his amazing photo of the Earth from space. He had at the time, I'm sure he has it somewhere still. It's almost like a Muppet version of himself. And he actually took it out and put it on his hand and held it there in front of the Grateful Dead and played with it. It's just hilariously funny.
The White House was no stranger to global leaders, but this was still a new one.
So when our group left the awning underneath the West Wing basement, come out into what's called West Executive Drive, it's basically parking now. It's just a street between the two buildings. The crowd in the balcony went, yeah, they all cheered, and Jerry started taking bows and waving, and, thank you very much, and our fellow Deadheads were all cheering for him.
There was time for tea with Tipper, and then it was time to get back to Landover.
Later that afternoon, President Clinton came back after the band had already left, and I was in the West Wing and hanging out, and he walked in, and he comes up to me with a big grin on his face, and he puts his hand on my shoulder and says, I heard that you had old Jerry Garcia here today. Is that true? And I said, yes, sir, it is. He said, you son of a bitch, first of all, I can't believe you had Jerry here. And two, I can't believe you had him here when I wasn't here. So he was like, tell me all about it. I want to know all about it, what they do, what they say, how's Jerry doing?
The former president can now check out the musical answer on the new Enjoying the Ride box.
Ooh, freedom. Ooh, liberty. Oh, leave me alone. Find my own way home.
From one form of liberty to another, here's an instant classic from the great Rebecca Adams, the sociologist who brought her class on tour and was deep into her study of deadheads.
I had quite an adventure in the Landover parking lot after a show once. I was trying to go to the shows with all different kinds of people, vendors and, hall dancers and whatever. I was trying to experience tour in a way that was different from the way my students had taught me. I went to the show with a guy who lived in Virginia and his girlfriend. And I won't go into all the details of what happened, but it is the wildest ride to a show I've ever had. And when we got out of the show on the last night, there were these police who were busting a nitrous vendor. And it wasn't that anyone minded them busting nitrous vendors. They were kind of not that well received at that point. But the police were being really mean to this guy. And they had him held down, face down in the parking lot, were holding him down, and he was crying. It was just horrible. And this guy I went to this show with yelled out, "I have a video camera on you. I'm getting everything on film." He didn't, but he yelled that to distract them. And they stopped harshing on the nitrous vendor and started chasing him through the parking lot.
Before we return to Rebecca's part of the story, I'll point out what an incredibly perfect move this was, both absurd and helpful, and timely in the era of the Rodney King trial.
I thought it was brilliant. I mean, he got the cop off that nitrous vendor.
But now there was a new problem.
He was my ride, and I never remember where I'm parked. And I had no idea. So I started chasing the police because they were chasing my friend. There was this corporate exercise park that was attached to the parking lot. I don't know if it was part of it or what, but there were like these little stations where you were supposed to stop and do push-ups or jump over a hurdle or, do whatever exercise businessmen did on their morning walks. We ran through that. And at one point, Henry split off and went through this really uneven turf, and the cops kept going. And I started following Henry right behind him. He got to this barbed wire fence and he just scurried up over it and was down on the other side. And there I was on the inside of the barbed wire fence. And I had to climb over that fence. He encouraged me. And I got up at the top and I caught my inner thigh on one of the barbs, and I literally just fell over the other side into a pile of something. It's a miracle. I don't think I hurt myself other than ripping the inside of my thigh with the barbed wire.
Owie. Chad Eyler had a more peaceful exit from the Cap Center's ample parking, and we'll let him send us off today.
I remember driving back to York that night. We went to my friend's apartment and we talked about the show. We knew it was great. We knew it was great in the moment, and we knew it was great after the show was done. That's all we could talk about. So, of course, we did it again the next night. We drove back down and went to the 318 show, which, again, just a stellar show. But that 317 was my go-to tape for driving around my hometown. It was just what a stellar one. Unbelievable.
The bus come by and I got on that sweater over here. It was Cowboy Lee at the wheel, the bus tune never ever learned. Coming all around, coming around you all now. Coming all around, coming around. Coming all around, coming around you all. Coming all around, coming around.
Thank you very much for tuning in to the Good Old Grateful Deadcast, friends. We'd like to thank our guests in this episode, David Lemieux, Sam Cutler, Dennis Alpert. Hey, what's up, Dennis? Tyler Roy-Hart, David Leopold, John Leopold, Rebecca Adams, Brian Schiff, Gary Lambert, Chris Goodspace, Winslow Colwell, Scott Jones, and Chad Eyler. Extra special thanks to friend of the Deadcast, David Gans, for his ongoing contributions of audio from his extensive interview archive. Executive producer for the Good Old Grateful Deadcast, Mark Pincus. Produced for Rhino Entertainment by Rich Mahan Promotions and Jesse Jarno. Special thanks to David Lemieux, Brian Dodd, and Doran Tyson. All rights reserved.